Tonight on Primetime, the United States and Iran edge closer to a possible framework agreement as negotiators push to ease regional tensions and reopen the Strait of Hormuz. So can a deal be done before talks collapse? Good evening. US President Donald Trump says negotiators should take their time in talks with Iran, insisting Washington will not be rushed into any agreement. Well, he adds that discussions are continuing with key issues still to be resolved.
250 years, but that I'm not going to get away with.
US President Donald Trump says Washington is in no hurry to finalize a nuclear agreement with Iran, insisting that time is on our side as negotiations continue amid rising tensions in the Middle East. In a Truth Social post, Trump said the US blockade on Iranian ships in the Strait of Hormuz would remain in full force until an agreement is reached, certified and signed. He also reiterated that Iran would not be allowed to develop or acquire a nuclear weapon. However, Trump said negotiations are continuing in what he described as an orderly and constructive manner. His comments come just one day after he suggested that a potential peace agreement with Iran had been largely negotiated and could eventually lead to the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. According to a senior US official, an immediate deal is unlikely, with key details still under discussion. The official says Iran's Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei has approved the broad framework of the agreement, although the outcome remains uncertain. Meanwhile, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian says Tehran is prepared to reassure the international community that it is not seeking nuclear weapons. But he also stressed that Iran would never compromise on its honor and dignity. At the same time, Iran's Tasnim news agency denied reports claiming Tehran had agreed to halt nuclear activities for 20 years or remove nuclear materials from the country. Still, major disagreements remain over sanctions relief, frozen Iranian oil revenues, Tehran's nuclear ambitions, and regional conflicts involving Iran-backed groups such as Hezbollah in Lebanon. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, meanwhile, said he and Trump agree that any final agreement with Iran must eliminate the nuclear threat posed by Tehran. Netanyahu also said Trump reaffirmed Israel's right to defend itself against threats across the region, including Lebanon. Turning to global markets, oil prices fell sharply amid uncertainty surrounding the talks. Brent crude dropped more than 4% to below $99 a barrel, while US crude also declined by more than 4%. Iran's Revolutionary Guards say only 33 vessels passed through the Strait of Hormuz in the past 24 hours after receiving permission from Tehran, far below the roughly 140 ships that typically cross daily before the conflict. Analysts say that while any agreement could help reinforce the fragile ceasefire and ease pressure on global markets, disruptions to energy supplies may continue well into 2027, keeping fuel and food prices elevated worldwide.
Well, Iran says it is finalizing a memorandum of understanding with the United States, mediated through Pakistan, as part of ongoing negotiations aimed at ending the conflict. Tehran says its 14-point proposal includes an end to hostilities, the lifting of sanctions, and the release of frozen Iranian assets, alongside measures on maritime access and the wider regional framework. Our correspondent Taraj Shirililo reports from Tehran.
Iran's foreign ministry spokesman Ismail Baqai has confirmed that Tehran and Washington are adding the finishing touches to an interim peace deal, while the mediated exchange of proposals and counter-proposals are inching slowly despite a burst of diplomatic optimism. According to the state-owned IRNA news agency, the spokesman announced that there are a number of stumbling blocks in the ongoing peace process mediated by Pakistan. Notably, Tehran's demanding complete end to hostilities, as well as releasing its frozen assets. He added that lifting the maritime blockade over Iran's southern ports in the Persian Gulf and the Sea of Oman stands out in Iran's conditions to sign what he termed a memorandum of understanding with the US. Meantime, the Revolutionary Guards, IRGC, announced that it allowed 33 vessels to sail across the Strait of Hormuz in one day, as there has been an increase in the number of ships transiting the narrow strategic waterway since last week. In a statement on Sunday, it said that over the past 24 hours, 33 vessels, including oil tankers, container ships, and other commercial vessels, passed through the Strait of Hormuz after obtaining permits and with the coordination of the IRGC Navy. In another development, Deputy Foreign Minister for Legal Affairs, Kazem Garibabadi, met the Omani Foreign Minister, Badr al-Busaidi, in Muscat on Sunday and conveyed him the verbal message of the Iranian Foreign Minister. According to a post on the senior Iranian diplomat's X account, he also held a meeting in Oman to review a set of principles governing the passage of vessels through the Strait of Hormuz, while respecting the security and national sovereignty of the coastal states of the strait and in light of applicable rules of international law. Over the weekend, Foreign Minister Abbas Araqchi held phone calls with the UN chief, Iraqi Kurdistan president, and his counterparts from Qatar for 2 times, Iraq, Turkey, Oman, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. The Iranian Foreign Ministry said in its statements that the talks focused on the latest diplomatic developments in the region aimed at preventing an escalation of tension and ending the war imposed by the US and Israel against Iran. Turaj Shiralilu, reporting from downtown Tehran for A News.
Well, joining us now is Francisco Kalesh Lima to discuss the latest in the Iran-US talks and where both sides say progress has been made but remain split over uranium enrichment and sanctions relief, amongst other points. Francisco, very good indeed to see you. Thank you for joining us on Primetime tonight. Okay, so both Washington and Tehran then seem to be talking up progress, don't they? But core issues still remain unresolved. On balance, how close do you think we are at this point to a deal?
Thank you for the invitation to be here. Good afternoon. I think that, in answering directly your question, it seems undeniable that at least this time, over a few months of discussions back and forth where we were never pretty sure if progress was actually being made, this time I think it's undeniable that some progress is happening. There are news coming in from Iran, which is also an important lens to look at for this purpose, because they have been denying most of the progress which President Trump has said had been happening for the past month or so. And it seems that indeed parties are close to an agreement. But the question here is really the content of the agreement. And the first thing I think is important to note is that based on the reports coming out, this is not a comprehensive or an ultimate peace deal. This is really just a form of postponing the current ceasefire and including in it a couple of principled points of sort of a framework agreement towards how negotiations will progress in the near future. Basically, if we look at what has been reported, this is a form of opening the strait and Iran gaining some economic oxygen with the lifting of some sanctions, possibly some frozen assets. But the ultimate questions regarding the fundamental interests, the fundamental issues between the US and Iran remain, notably, of course, the nuclear program and the missile. It's always important to recall, those were the reasons for the war to start. Not Hormuz, a problem that was created in the meantime. The war started precisely to address the issue of Iran's nuclear program and Iran's missile ballistic. And regarding those 2 points, apparently this deal will not solve these issues.
Yeah, we're just having 1 or 2 issues with the sound, so apologies to viewers for that, but we do want to stay with you. It's a very, very important topic. Uranium enrichment and sanctions relief you mentioned there remains sort of major sticking points, don't they? I mean, who actually looks closer at this point to moving their red lines, if any side is moving at all?
Right. I think that regarding, first, it's really hard to know at this stage. We're hearing conflicting aspect or conflicting reports regarding the details of this agreement. But one thing can be said, which is in relation to the sanctions relief, the US, I think, would always be open for it if they were able to gain something from it. So the question is not really whether the US is willing to reduce, to lift some of the sanctions and some of the Iranian frozen assets. The question is, what will it gain in response to that? The fundamental question, I think, will be, and still is, the uranium enrichment program. And from what we're hearing, it seems that this deal won't solve this issue, possibly will not even properly address it. The question is, will it be dismantled? And how, to what extent? What will happen, for example, to the 440 kilograms of highly enriched uranium in Iranian soil? What about other stocks of enriched uranium which Iran still has in its territory? I mean, just as a suggestion, something which highlights and shows the conflicting narratives regarding this aspect. President Trump seems to be adamant, stating that Iran will have to give up the highly enriched uranium. But this week, or during this last week, the Iran's supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, has apparently given a directive, an internal directive, saying that no highly enriched uranium will leave the country. So again, the fundamental question regarding Iranian nuclear program remains.
And the Strait of Hormuz, Francisco, very, very much on the minds of people around the world, particularly economists, investors, business people, absolutely central to these talks. What do you think is the likelihood of the Strait of Hormuz being opened and totally unencumbered by any other conditions? And also, I want to ask you about this because Iran has, in a sense, proven that using a closure or interference on the Strait is something that, I guess in one sense, has been highly effective. Do you think it will be tempted to use this as a tool again?
Right. So regarding your first question, whether the opening of the Strait is likely, I think that to the extent that this deal is likely to happen, so is the opening of the Strait. However, the opening of the Strait, it will only be the first step of what will have to be a very complicated and disputed process until we reach a pre-war kind of situation in the Strait. Just to illustrate with some examples what I mean here. Opening the Strait does not, first of all, mean a completely safe passage, right? We still have mines in the Strait, but also commercial vessels going through might still fear and legitimately fear RIGC, rogue attacks, or perhaps a recommencement of hostilities at any moment. And therefore, this will have an effect, an economic effect, notably, for example, on the prices of insurance, which commercial vessels will have to pay in order to pass and circulate around the Strait. Therefore, the international coalition, which apparently Britain and France is trying to head regarding the assurance of the safety of passing through the Strait, a military presence of several European and also non-European states, would be an important measure to help get back to that sort of pre-war kind of situation. But there is still an important question that lingers regarding the opening of the Strait, which is Iran still continues and seems to be rather moving to claim, rather than a toll now, but some kind of environmental fee or a fee for clearing the Strait from mines, etc. And this is still an important and a sticky point, right? Because, of course, Iran is trying to seek an economic benefit from it, being able to collect money from the commercial vessels that pass through the strait. But I think that the main point on the Iranian side is really not this economic benefit. The main point is that I think Iran is seeking to reach an implicit recognition of its control of this over the strait, and this would be an effective way to do it, right? Having commercial ships, when trying to transit through the strait, having to ask for Iranian authorization and sort of contributing, having to pay this environmental safety fee, whatever they want to call it, is a form of implicit recognition. So I think that Iran, even though might be willing to open the strait, is trying to open it towards a new scenario, a new status quo, not necessarily the pre-one.
Yeah, very interesting indeed. In terms of timeframes, we're hearing talk of a possible framework within days. I mean, realistically, can a deal of this complexity be pieced together that quickly without major compromises being watered down, do you think?
Right. I think that the catch here is probably that we're not reaching the sort of complex deal we might be expecting here. I think that we're open to a deal, but that deal is essentially a framework agreement to opening the strait and setting the main guidelines to what will be negotiations in the next 30 or 60 days. If you were to ask me if I thought it was likely that in the next coming days we were able to reach an agreement, like, for example, the JCPOA, right, the nuclear agreement between the United States and Iran signed in 2015. No, I think we're very far from that. That took 2 years. That took the involvement of hundreds of U.S. Officials, CIA officials, State Department officials, nuclear scientists, and it's a complex 100-page deal with several schedules. No, we're not close to getting to the point where we're able to have that kind of agreement. Again, I think this is merely a form of continuing the ceasefire with this important but slight catch, which is the slight opening of the strait.
And finally, Francisco, if we do fail to see a deal, if it doesn't quite happen in the coming days, does that necessarily mean an escalation, or do you think we're likely now to stay firmly in the zone of diplomacy?
Right. I think that it is clearly not in the U.S.'s interest to restart the conflict. And I think that one of the reasons why that has not happened, despite several of President Trump's deadlines having not been basically complied with, it's because the U.S. knows that there is little to gain with the continuation of an air campaign. Perhaps the U.S. could gain something else if it was willing to commit with ground troops, with a ground troop kind of operation, but it seems like the U.S. is not willing to do it. And therefore, I think that the marginal utility, the marginal gain which the U.S. can take from the continuation of hostilities is very little here. I think that the U.S. will press for a deal. But having said this, it is important to always consider that we also have on the U.S.'s side Israel. And I think that within Israel, the prospect and the evaluation of this possible deal is very different from the one that is being made by the U.S. administration. The pressure from within Israel and in its government seems to be for the U.S. not to settle for the kind of deal it's preparing to settle, for the pressure on the Iranian regime to continue, be it economic pressure with the sanctions, with the continuation of the frozen assets, but also with a continuation of the military campaign. So I guess that we will see probably if this deal does not materialize itself in the coming days, a big pressure from Israel, notably from the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in his talks with President Trump, for them to crack on and continue with the military campaign that had been going on during the month of March.
Very interesting indeed. Francisco, great to get your analysis. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay, after the break, we'll look at the latest escalation in the Russia-Ukraine war and what it means for the future of the ongoing conflict. Don't go away. A warm welcome back wherever you're watching Primetime. Russia launched one of its largest aerial assaults on Kyiv since the start of the war on Sunday. The barrage killed at least 4 people and wounded nearly 100 others. Hours later, Ukraine reportedly struck a major Russian oil pumping facility supplying the Moscow region.
Russia's hours-long overnight barrage killed 4 people in Kyiv and 2 more in the surrounding area, and it wounded nearly 100, according to Ukrainian officials. Authorities said dozens of residential buildings and several schools had been damaged, many in the center of Kyiv. Ukrainian President Zelensky, who on Sunday visited a number of damaged buildings in Kyiv, said Russia had also targeted water supply facilities, saying Moscow wanted to damage them before the summer increased demand. In total, the Air Force said Russia launched 90 missiles and 600 drones. Moscow said it used Oreshnik, Iskander, Kinzhal and Zircon missiles in retaliation for what it described as Ukrainian strikes on civilian targets inside Russia. Kyiv denies targeting civilians. Russia's defense ministry said the strikes were aimed at Ukrainian military command facilities, including sites used by ground forces and military intelligence, as well as air bases and military-industrial infrastructure. European leaders condemned the Kyiv attack, with Britain and Germany describing the use of the Oreshnik, an intermediate-range missile capable of carrying nuclear warheads, as an escalation. Meanwhile, following the strikes on Kyiv and the surrounding region, Ukraine reportedly targeted a major Russian oil pumping station supplying the Moscow region. The Votorovo facility, part of Russia's state-owned pipeline network, also supplies fuel to major Russian airports.
Well, joining us now is Professor Alexei Haran to assess the shifting dynamics of the Russia-Ukraine war and what the latest developments signal for the conflict going forward. Professor, very good to see you. Thank you for joining us tonight on Primetime. We're seeing these
Thank you for the invitation.
We're seeing these repeated long-range strikes, aren't we, on both sides? It's a familiar pattern. But do you think we're now entering a more dangerous phase?
Look, when you're saying on both sides, it's a little bit disturbing for me because you put on the equal, on the equal sides Ukraine and Russia. Look, first of all, I would say that I never heard such frightening sounds during the nights. Believe me. So it's 5th year of the war, and it was really frightening because of the numbers of these missiles and Ukrainian interceptions. Second, in order to add to your introduction, look, also Ukrainian cultural facilities were targeted, 2 museums, several theaters. So all of it is in the center of Kyiv. It's very symbolic that last month was 40th anniversary of Chernobyl tragedy. So as a result of this strike, museum devoted to Chernobyl have destroyed. Again, and I mentioned other theaters and museums. So basically it shows what Russia is doing. Russia is targeting civilian infrastructures and also Ukrainian cultural institutions because they're fighting with Ukrainian identity. Don't forget about it. When you are quoting Russian information sources, look, there's no trust, to Russia because look, when you quote it, it's necessary somehow for me to reply because again, you put on the equal side what Russia and what Ukraine is reporting. Russia is a Nazi state. I'm sorry to say that, okay? But so the information is totally distorted. There's no real information in Russia. So yes, right now, what we see right now is that Putin actually, he sticks to his aim. His aim was the same from the very beginning. He would like to crush not Ukraine, Ukrainian identity. That's why, there are so many deportations of Ukrainian children. There are repressions against anything Ukrainian on the occupied territories, and so on and so forth. It's not the war about, territories, as sometimes Trump or Vance are saying, they're in the trap of Russian narrative. It's not about that, because we know Russia would not be stopped. So if they are not, if there would be no enough pressure on Russia. So the tactics and maybe the strategy of Ukraine at this point is that we use it to target Russia oil resources, oil refineries, and everything connected with the export of oil, because this is very painful for Russia. That's what we can do at this. We are not targeting civilians. Okay, we are not targeting civilians, whatever Russians are saying. So, but yes, oil targets, yes. This is a tactic of Ukraine. It's very painful for Russia. And now we have enough drones. Unfortunately, we do not have missiles, but we have drones. Oh, by the way, now we have Ukrainian missiles. Yes, we have Ukrainian missiles. But against what Russia used, Russian missiles, unfortunately, we do not have enough Patriots, because now a lot of Patriots, which were supposed to go to Ukraine, they are now transferred to the Middle East. So definitely the situation is not easy. But now we have a card. When Trump is saying, no, Ukraine doesn't have cards, we have cards. And the main card is that Ukrainian people are fighting.
And Professor, you mentioned other things there affecting the situation. You also mentioned President Trump. How are shifting relations between President Trump, China, Europe, how is that reshaping the global balance of power and therefore affecting this conflict?
Okay, so let me start from the most recent event, the visits of Trump and Putin to Beijing. And there were some, speculations that maybe Trump will influence Xi and Xi will influence Putin in order to stop the war, somehow, to reduce the fighting, to freeze the conflict. The answer is no. These speculations, remain speculations. And there is a background for that, because unfortunately for China is interested to have continuous war in Ukraine. Definitely, China may say, okay, do not, to Russia, do not use nuclear power, nuclear missiles. Yes, that's what China is not interested. But China is interested in continuing of Russian aggression. Why? Because of this, Russia now is a younger partner of China. Okay, Russia has no other way than to ask China for help, and China is providing this help. Goods of dual use, they are going to Russia. China is buying cheap Russian oil and gas. So in this sense, China is not interested, to stop the war. Moreover, it's the war in Ukraine also diverts attention diverts attention of Europe and also the United States. Okay, so again, for China, it's beneficial. So unfortunately, so far, China is saying that this is a peace-loving country, but what China is doing in Ukraine, unfortunately, it's stimulating the war. If China would like to stop the war, they could do it very, very easily, because Russia relies heavily on the goods which are coming from China. Regarding Trump, the positive thing, the US is still supplying intelligence data to Ukraine. This is very, very important for us. But that now the US is not providing weapons for free. All the weapons which are coming from the US are bought by Europeans, and then they provide it to Ukraine. Trump didn't fulfill his promises, because remember, he was saying that, okay, if Ukraine doesn't want peace, I will press Ukraine. If Russia doesn't want peace, I will press Russia. We don't see this pressure on Russia, unfortunately.
And
Despite all the tragedies that we have right now and the recent 2 days in Kyiv.
Professor, let's go back to the Middle East crisis, because you touched on that. I mean, to what extent is the crisis in the Middle East involving Iran is influencing the calculations, do you think, in Washington, Beijing and European capitals towards what they do with Ukraine?
First of all, about the United States, because this is clear. This is clear. Unfortunately, this war, they are in this war, they are in this swamp, they don't know how to get out of it. They concentrate all their diplomatic resources, all their military resources in the Middle East. Okay, I have already said that unfortunately it diverts a lot of missiles, American missiles, to the Middle East, not to Ukraine, and that's a real problem for us. Regarding also the price for oil, the prices for oil, as you know very well, they increased, and this is beneficial for Russia. So that's the direct result of the war in Iran. So definitely it created much more difficult situation in Ukraine. Paradoxically, also this war showed that Ukraine has military technologies which can be shared with other countries, specifically the Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia. I'm talking about Ukrainian drones and Ukrainian experience in creating anti-missile and anti-drone system. But in general, the influence is negative for Ukraine.
Professor, we thank you very much indeed for joining us. Appreciate your analysis. Thanks for being with us on Primetime tonight.
Thank you.
Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at the top business stories shaping the day with Andy Mioch. Don't go away. Welcome back. You're watching Primetime now. Andy Mioch has joined us to bring us the very latest business news stories. Andy, what have you got on the agenda tonight?
Well, Guy, oil prices have fallen and markets have risen on hopes that the US and Iran are inching towards a peace deal. China's tech giant Huawei announced a novel approach to chip development, and the Pope has issued a stark warning on artificial intelligence. So let's have a look. First up, oil prices hit their lowest levels in 2 weeks, even as Tehran and Washington played down hopes for an imminent breakthrough. Meanwhile, the peace deal optimism was also felt throughout markets. European shares were at their highest in 2 months, easing fears of a global economic slowdown.
Brent crude futures tumbled to below $98 a barrel on Monday, as optimism grew that the US and Iran could soon reach an agreement to end the conflict and reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Still, uncertainty remains high, with officials on both sides signaling that key issues are yet to be resolved and continuing to send mixed messages on the progress of negotiations. Meanwhile, European shares hit their highest in more than 2 months on Monday, buoyed by signs Iran and the US were negotiating an end to their conflict, easing concerns about inflation and a global economic slowdown. The pan-European Stoxx X 600 was up 0.6% at 629.2 points at 8:18 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time, just shy of a record high touched in late February before the Middle East war erupted. Most sectors gained, led by banks with a 1.9% jump. Airlines also advanced, with Lufthansa and Air France KLM up 3.7% and 7.5%, respectively. While Tehran and Washington sought to temper expectations of an imminent breakthrough, investors focused on US President Donald Trump's comment on Saturday that a framework to reopen the Strait of Hormuz had been largely negotiated. Shortly before 10:30 a.m., Germany's DAX was up 1.4% and stood at 25,241 points.
Chinese technology giant Huawei announced a new chip design approach that will be used for the first time this fall in its Kirin smartphone chips. Despite US sanctions, the company said it expects its new chip technology could deliver capabilities close to the global frontier of chip making by decade end.
China's Huawei Technologies expects to design high-end chips by 2031 with transistor density equivalent to 1.4 nanometer processes, despite US sanctions that have made it hard for China to build the world's most advanced chips. The projection, made by Huawei on Monday, was the most eye-catching claim of what the company calls the Tau scaling law, a new principle for improving chips as the industry can no longer rely mainly on making transistors smaller. Although Huawei did not provide independent performance data, the target is significant because 1.4 nanometer is expected to be close to the global frontier for advanced chip making around the end of the decade. China is widely seen as unlikely to reach that level through conventional manufacturing alone, because Washington has restricted its access to advanced lithography tools and other key semiconductor technologies. Huawei said its Kirin chips, scheduled to launch in the fall of 2026, would be the first to use a related architecture called logic folding, which the company said would shorten wiring inside chips and considerably improve performance.
Over in the auto industry, Pakistan's Lucky Motors has partnered with China's Guangzhou Automobile Group to launch electric vehicles. The company is betting that the fuel crisis will speed up the EV switch in the country.
Pakistan's Lucky Motors is betting fuel price shocks and rooftop solar adoption will speed up electric vehicle demand as it launches EVs with Chinese state-owned automaker GAC and plans local assembly as early as December 2026. The launch comes as Pakistani consumers face their sharpest fuel price increases in years, with prices double the rate of 4 years ago, driven by supply disruption from the US-Iran conflict straining shipments through the Strait of Hormuz. Lucky Motors is a subsidiary of Lucky Cement, one of Pakistan's largest conglomerates. It signed a deal with Guangzhou Automobile Group, its third automotive brand after Kia and Peugeot, both assembled at its Karachi plant, and began displaying 4 Aeon and Hiptech models across Pakistan last week. The company expects the initial imported stock of GAC cars to sell out within 2 months. EVs remain a small fraction of Pakistan's annual car sales, dominated by Japanese and Korean brands. The shift has been faster in two-wheelers, where EV sales nearly tripled to around 5% of all bikes sold, according to consultancy Renewables First.
In the gold mining sector, Ghana says it's committed to renewing the lease for Goldfields' Tarkwa mine. Officials deny that the process is being delayed, adding that the company must present its development plans. The lease is up in 2027.
Ghana's government is committed to renewing the mining lease for Goldfields' Tarkwa mine, it said on Monday, adding that it will subject the South African miner to fresh scrutiny of its plans before any renewal is granted. CEO of Ghana's Minerals Commission, the sector regulator, denied the government was delaying the lease renewal process, saying officials had held meetings with Goldfields as recently as last Friday. Some civil society and community groups have called on the government not to renew the Tarkwa lease, arguing that its benefits have not been shared sufficiently with host communities. In April 2025, the government rejected Goldfields' application to renew its lease for the Damang mine and assumed operational control of the asset. The Ghana Chamber of Mines warned this month that lease revocations and renewal uncertainty risk creating the impression that security of tenure in Ghana is not guaranteed, potentially hurting investment. The lease for Tarkwa, a cornerstone asset for the South African miner that produced about 427,000 ounces of gold in 2025, expires in 2027.
Now for some space news. China has launched a new mission to its Tiangong space station. The 3 astronauts blasted off on Sunday in a mission set to test long-duration human spaceflight as part of Beijing's plans to send a man to the moon by 2030.
China's Shenzhou 23 spacecraft carrying 3 astronauts blasted off on Sunday from the Jiuquan Satellite Launch Center in northwest China, sending a crew to the Tiangong space station, where 1 member is expected to remain for up to a year. The mission will test long-duration human spaceflight as Beijing advances plans for a crewed moon landing by 2030. A 1-year stay in orbit would mark a national record for China and rank among the longest space missions globally. One of the 3 astronauts is expected to stay on the Tiangong space station for about a year, though the final decision will depend on the progress of the mission, the China Manned Space Agency said. The previous mission, Shenzhou 22, was launched ahead of schedule in November to bring back 3 astronauts after their Shenzhou 20 spacecraft was damaged by space debris in orbit.
And finally, for some AI-related news, we go to the Vatican. Pope Leo warned that artificial intelligence is fueling conflict and urged the world to slow down with advances. A co-founder of Anthropic, one of the world's top AI companies, was at the event and said firms like his faced strong commercial pressures and needed outside scrutiny.
Pope Leo XIV called for stronger regulation and a slower pace of AI advances in a landmark theological document released Monday, warning the technology was fueling and normalizing conflict around the world. In a sweeping and eagerly anticipated manifesto on the subject, Leo warned that AI should not be concentrated in the hands of only a few people. He called for disarming AI, which does not mean rejecting technology, but preventing it from dominating humanity. Leo said that merely regulating it is insufficient. History's first US-born Pope was writing in his first encyclical, a key text outlining the Pope's view on global affairs, titled Magnificent Humanity. It was released alongside Christopher Olah, one of the co-founders of the AI giant Anthropic. Olah said that the development of artificial intelligence cannot be left solely to technology companies, urging greater oversight from religious leaders, governments, and civil society. He added there was a real possibility that AI will displace human labor at very large scale.
And the Holy Spirit come down upon you and remain.
And that's a wrap on the business brief for tonight. Handing it back to you, Guy.
Fascinating stuff as always, Andy. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, after the break, we'll look at Russian President Vladimir Putin's visit to Kazakhstan for key regional talks, as Armenia's absence from Eurasian Economic Union meetings and shifting South Caucasus transport routes raises questions over future integration and energy ties. Don't go away. Welcome back to Primetime. Good to have you with us this evening. Kazakhstan's capital is set to host a series of major political events this week, with Russian President Vladimir Putin expected in Astana for a state visit alongside meetings of the Eurasian Economic Union. Our correspondent Fariza Kalamazina reports.
Russian President Vladimir Putin is expected in Kazakhstan this week for a state visit at the invitation of President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev. Putin will be in Astana from May 27th to 29th, with talks expected to focus on strategic cooperation and allied ties between Kazakhstan and Russia. The visit comes as the two countries maintain close cooperation across energy, transport, industry, and transit. Trade turnover exceeded $27 billion last year, making Russia one of Kazakhstan's largest economic partners. At the same time, there have also been trade tensions. Kazakhstan's exports to Russia fell by nearly 17% despite overall trade growth, while restrictions on some agricultural exports and transport routes have complicated trade. One recent example was the suspension of Kazakh oil transit to Germany through the Druzhba pipeline. And against this backdrop, talks between Tokayev and Putin are expected to focus not only on political coordination, but also on trade, logistics and energy cooperation. Alongside the bilateral meetings, Putin is also expected to take part in the Eurasian Economic Forum on May 28, followed a day later by a meeting of the Supreme Eurasian Economic Council in Astana. One notable absence, however, will be Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, who has confirmed he will not attend. Officially, Yerevan says the decision is linked to domestic political commitments, but it comes at a time when Armenia has been moving closer to the European Union. Parliament recently approved in first reading a bill launching the country's EU accession process. Experts expect Armenia's future inside the Eurasian Economic Union to remain part of discussions in Astana. Fariza Kalimurzina, Helmeti, A News.
Well, Russia and Armenia's shifting relationship is again in focus, this time over energy supplies and Yerevan's ties with the European Union. Well, the Kremlin says Armenia's future path of economic integration remains an open question, despite Yerevan saying it does not plan to pursue anti-Russian policies. Well, this issue was discussed in Moscow during talks between President Putin and Prime Minister Pashinyan. Armenia is still a member of the Eurasian Economic Union, but has also taken steps to deepen relations with the European Union, including launching an accession process.
We have also heard statements from the Armenian leadership that there is a very attractive and highly concessional price for Russian gas and energy supplies. This is indeed the case. Russia remains a reliable and responsible supplier of energy to all countries, and especially to its closest allies and partners. But of course, such a regime is not possible for participants of other integration frameworks. There, the pricing category is entirely different. It is market-based. This is well known to our friends in Yerevan. We continue the dialogue.
Armenia has taken a major step in reshaping its regional connectivity, and Georgia is at the heart of it. Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan announced the Akalkalaki-Kars line is officially open for Armenian exports and imports, calling it a landmark moment. And Tbilisi is being credited as a key partner in making it happen. Our own Nini Nikolashvili reports now from Tbilisi.
Armenia's transport map just got redrawn, and Georgia holds a central place in it. Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan announced on May 24th that the Akhalkalaki-Kars railway running through Georgian territory and into Turkey is now open for Armenian cargo, both exports and imports. Pashinyan personally thanked Tbilisi and Ankara for their cooperation, recognizing Georgia's role as the essential transit bridge that makes the entire corridor work. The route connects into the broader Baku-Tbilisi-Kars rail network, giving Armenia onward access to European and global markets, while reducing logistics costs and delivery times. For Georgia, deeper integration of the corridor means increased transit volumes, stronger regional relevance, and growing leverage as a hub between Europe and Asia. The backdrop matters. Turkey and Armenia have no diplomatic relations, and the border between these two countries has been closed since 1993, when Ankara shut it in support of Azerbaijan during the Karabakh conflict. Georgia's territory effectively fills that gap, allowing trade to flow between the two neighbors without requiring a direct border opening. Turkey's special envoy for Armenia normalization, Serdar Kilic, welcomed the development, calling it a step toward direct trade and expressing hope that it would strengthen the emerging four-way cooperation between Turkey, Armenia, Azerbaijan and Georgia, a grouping in which Tbilisi plays a quiet but indispensable role. Pashinyan said the next steps will include direct Armenia-Turkey and Armenia-Azerbaijan railways, followed by an Armenia-Iran rail link via Nakhchivan, all under the US-backed TRIP project, the Trump route for international peace and prosperity. As the region rewires its connectivity, Georgia finds itself not on the sidelines, but squarely in the middle of one of the South Caucasus' most consequential transport shifts in decades. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Well, joining us now is A News's Deputy Editor-in-Chief Orkan Amashov to break down the political signals from Astana and the tensions around Armenia's place in the Eurasian Economic Union. Orkan, always great to see you. Very interesting this, isn't it? Putin set to visit Kazakhstan. How much of this is about economic cooperation versus just Russia trying to influence its neighbours?
Well, I suppose both elements are present as long as this particular three-day state visit is concerned. Bearing in mind it's a state visit and it's a massive visit coinciding with the 5th Eurasian Economic Forum and also the meeting of the Strategic Council of Eurasian Economic Union. Of course, the decision regarding this must have been made some time ago. Bilateral Kazakhstan and Russia agenda are going to dominate the landscape there, and naturally economic factor is present. Plus, of course, at a time when Kazakhstan itself, massive country, 2.7 million square kilometre territory, massive, bigger than UK, France, Germany, Italy taken together.
Huge land border with Russia, of course, yeah.
I can tell you what is the length of the border, 7,500 kilometers. It's a country which is immensely consequential and its importance will increase from now on. It's a country which is, if to use their official language employed by Kazakh Foreign Office, they're engaged in multivectoral foreign policy, trying to navigate between China, which is their biggest trading partner, Russia, former imperial master, the relations there remaining still asymmetrical, and of course United States, European Union, which are new actors with which Kazakhstan is trying to forge good, effective and functional relations. But Russia, of course, naturally, largely, if you look at what Russia was 30 years ago and what Russia is today, with all due respect to Russia and their aspirations, a power in decline. I mean, one very vivid example of their decline is that they used to be the dominant force in Central Asia. They used to be the dominant trading partner of Kazakhstan. Now that partner is China. China, Kazakhstan, bilateral trade turnover stands at $50 billion, and that figure will go up from now on. In fact, that's what is happening. Whereas Russia's Kazakhstan trade turnover figure is around $30 billion, significant, but no longer comparable to first trade partner. Economic relations are incredibly important, but we have to be very, very clear about one thing. For all of the things we say about Russia, it's still to be reckoned with, and Kazakhstan's critical infrastructure when it comes to their energy export capabilities is still tied to Russia. 80% of crude oil of Kazakhstan flows to Russia, basically. Kazakhstan still relies on Russian refineries. So when it comes to the wealth of Kazakhstan as a nation, that export capabilities are not really sovereign as yet. Yes. That is the reason why Kazakhstan is so hell-bent on Middle Corridor. That is the reason why China is investing too much in Middle Corridor. Not because they are interested in Kazakhstan's economic capabilities and prowess, because they themselves want Kazakhstan to be more independent in order to trade with China more. So this trip is taking place at a juncture when Russia, increasingly isolated in many ways, is trying to entrench its influence in Kazakhstan, which is still very powerful there. I mean, Russia to be reckoned with, as I said, but simultaneously, of course, there are other matters of specific bilateral trade turnover.
Yeah, and one other matter that seems to have cropped up is Russian criticism of Armenia, in this case specifically about Armenia missing these EA-EU meetings. What's going on here?
Armenia has been incorrigible in terms of not attending latest meetings of Russia-dominated organizations, namely CSTO, and now in this particular case, Eurasian Economic Union. That meeting will take place on the 29th of May, just 8 days before the crucial parliamentary elections, and one might say Armenian leadership is incredibly busy with a pre-election process, and naturally that's the reason why they're not attending. I think, unlike CSTO, Armenia has been very interested in developing its relation with this economic space. I think that they're partly down to the fact that leadership is very busy. Number two, fact that they do not want to attend a meeting where Armenia's fate will be discussed, because increasingly there are massive questions being asked by Russians and quite often by other countries of that economic space. Can you really aspirationally claim that you want to join European Union and remain a member of the Eurasian Economic Union? Because becoming European Union member of European Union will automatically mean that you will not stay there. So what Armenia is doing something incredibly shrewd and something which deserves the respect and perhaps even praise. Armenia is saying that, look here, I mean, I'm interested in being part of you, and I will carry on being part of you as long as I'm interested. But one day, when there is a better offer coming from European, I will leave. And Russia is saying that it's not fair. I mean, you're benefiting from us, and you are openly saying that one day you will leave. It does not look like a proper arrangement. I mean, you're saying that, well, it's a realpolitik. And the reality is that Russia has got a number of tools to influence economic life of Armenia, and Russia is saying that, look here, the market price for natural gas in the European market is $600 per 1,000 cubic meters, and we have been selling you natural gas at a discounted price of $177 per 1,000 the cubic meters, and basically you're benefiting from it. Do you believe that whilst talking openly and with passion about your aspirations, you will still be able to enjoy this economic benefit? And at that moment, of course, the question emerges: what will happen after the 7th of election? Will Russia carry out its threat? Russia may, of course, but basically, and since I mentioned about this economic dependency, if Armenia and Turkish-Armenian normalization happens, that will provide Armenia with an excellent opportunity to properly integrate into the EU market, but that will be a long-term process. And Russia is I think that this particular threat is an attempt to influence election outcome, and could potentially be deemed as part of the wider Russian hybrid threat in the context of Armenian elections. Very interesting.
I mean, you characterise Russia at the top as a power in decline. Is this group, the EAEU, is this an entity in decline? Do you see it potentially in the future fragmenting, or is it still strong, influential, powerful?
When I say Russia in decline, what I mean is that Russia is not increasing its economic clout. Geopolitically, Russia is becoming increasingly irrelevant in many ways. When you look at their bilateral trade and the dynamics of their relationship with Beijing, you realize that by means of getting support for their war in Ukraine, and that support coming from Ukraine, their relative power vis-à-vis Beijing is decreasing. Yes. They're becoming less of a power. Russia does no longer play an important role in Europe's energy security the way it used to play, so they're declining in that sense. When you compare them to the United States, I mean, they're no longer comparable. Russia does retain certain elements of indispensability. So basically, back to the crux of the question I mentioned, I think Eurasian Economic Union will remain relevant because there are important actors, but without Kazakhstan, which is number 2 actor there, their relevance cannot be deemed as potent as it would have been, as could have been without Kazakhstan. So basically, your answer to that question is that no, Eurasian Economic Union is incredibly important, but step by step, of course, Kazakhstan's role will increase there.
Well, Ken, always a pleasure to have you with us, to get your analysis. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at how Baku is positioning itself as a global coordination hub for civil society from the Global South following the World Urban Forum and the adoption of the Baku Declaration. Don't go away. A warm welcome back wherever you're watching Primetime. And now we look at how a new era of diplomacy is unfolding in Baku as the city emerges as a coordination centre for Global South civil society following the World Urban Forum. Well, as part of Baku Urban Week, civil society leaders from over 110 countries gathered for the first ever General Assembly of the Global South NGO platform, alongside new institutions, agreements and partnerships shaping its international role. Well, I'm delighted to say that joining us now is Faoud Karimli, Secretary General of the Global South NGO platform, to discuss how Baku is positioning itself as a hub for Global South civil society, the significance of the new NGO platform representing 116 countries, and what the Baku Declaration could mean for the future of urban governance and international cooperation. Fouad, great to see you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us in the studio.
Thank you for having me.
Baku then now hosting this Global South NGO platform. How significant is this, do you think, in terms of a shift of soft power and international influence?
So first of all, thank you for having me. I think that's a very interesting question. So when we look at the origins of the Global South NGO platform, it started with the COP29 NGO coalition. So this goes back 2 years in basically the biggest international event in terms of the UN. And we saw that there was this organic development of the shift from the coalition to the Global South NGO platform. So the members started saying, look, we're all from the Global South, we're all united, so why not make this? And that kind of shifted to that because the members decided that that's something that's needed, that's something that's necessary. So that was something that was lacking in the Global South space. Yes, there is the UN Office for South-South Cooperation, but there was something that was lacking in terms of coordination between the civil society and the Global South. Of course, the main aim here is to unite the civil society organizations of the Global South, but of course, the fact that the Secretariat was voted in to be in Azerbaijan shows that there's a significant trust from our member NGOs to the Azerbaijani host country, basically, in terms of the local NGOs that are running it. And as a side note as well, we see that in a time of significant political developments in international politics, we see the Global South being more demanding. We see middle powers and small powers asking for their rights, basically, looking for their role in international or global politics. And this does reflect itself on civil society. Well, civil society has a soft power role. So they do affect international policy in terms of guiding what the Global South needs, and what better way than to have a civil society organization that unites them. Looking at grassroots organizations that don't have the ability to go to these UN conferences, to have their conferences of their own. And now they have a platform to speak their mind, basically, and reach those policymakers.
And more than 100 signatures on this Baku Declaration. I mean, in the one sense that is symbolic, of course, but in another it's also a new model perhaps of how cooperation could work going forward.
Yeah, when we look at these international events, we see that yes, there are stakeholders that are there are UN bodies that coordinate them, but then there's a lot of people that come individually. I myself have been going to these events for the past few years, and I had to network with people and meet them. But now, for example, at COP30 just last year in Brazil, in Belém, we went and had a side event, and we had no problem in, for example, networking because all of our members were already there. So they were there present and they were bringing their friends. So it kept on growing and growing, right? So that is the sense of we see that resonate. So when we already had WOF 13, we already had NGOs contacting us saying we want to be a member because they've heard about it. While we still hadn't been institutionalized, we're still in that process because we were voted in just a few days ago.
Fouad, I spent some time at WOF 13, like many people. Something I was struck by were there were people from all over the world who were all really intrigued to learn more about Azerbaijan's post-conflict reconstruction experience. Is that something that you think really carries weight internationally?
So when we look at the World Urban Forum, right, there were some historic developments that took place. So first of all, the high-level meeting between the political leaders, right? So that was something that never took place in the World Urban Forum before. One of the other significant and really close to my heart is that there was a WOF NGO forum. So that forum also brought together hundreds of NGO members. That's where we were really doing the networking and looking at the Baku Declaration and saying, look, You know, Azerbaijan is a country that suffered from 30 years of conflict, right? We had our homes destroyed, we had it basically a separatist regime, but now, for the past few years, we've been reconstructing it. So Azerbaijan was really in an optimal position to host the World Urban Forum because we had these positive elements in terms of reconstruction. And a lot of our members actually saw that. They went to Karabakh, they saw Zangilan and the smart cities that developed. And it's kind of sad to say, but a lot of our members also said, this is a village in your country, but in our country, this is actually a city. Because there were these houses with solar panels that were heating the water on their own. It was self-sustainable because it was built from the ground up, right? So Azerbaijan really is exemplary in that sense. And the Baku Declaration, the fact that it got over 500 signatures also shows that NGOs are aware of this as well.
And do you think this is part of a broader shift where global South countries aren't content with being told what to do? They're really taking power into their own hands and starting to influence international organizations in a much more direct way than perhaps they have done in the past.
So we do see that, for example, although there are some representation of global South countries in international organizations, it's not that strong. So for example, yes, there is a UN Office for South-South Cooperation. Mstima Al-Khatib was kind enough to come to Baku, but then we look at other international organizations where the global South is left out. So having this kind of platform in itself, by its name, by its nature, it's a platform. So what we do is we give our members, our NGOs, a place to speak their mind, basically bring their issues to the spotlight where we can connect them with international policymakers and stakeholders, and they can see that actually what I'm doing, the issues that my country is facing, my community is facing, can be addressed, especially in a way that we think it should be addressed. So not in a top-down approach where developed or other international organizations, developed countries and international organizations, tell them this is how you should do it. No, they say we have solutions, we have local solutions. We just need resources, we need knowledge, we need networking. And our aim is to bridge that. It's not to do something, very magical, but it's just filling a gap that's never been filled before.
So do you foresee a time soon where there will be a kind of a shift in global governance, where global South will take its place, equal place at the top table?
So there is a shift that's been going on for the past few years. We see Azerbaijan's rise as a middle power. We see other countries rise as a middle power as well. The unipolar world is over, so multilateralism is being supported by a lot of countries. But that's at the governance level, right? So that's between countries. But what about civil society? I think that's what the Global South NGO platform really feels specifically, is that while this transition is taking place, it has to be in parallel with civil society. So Azerbaijan's NGO sphere has been flourishing for the past few years. I myself and other NGO members have been traveling all over the world, showing them our reality. But that's not just us. The Global South NGO platform is over 100 countries, NGOs from 100 countries. So their reality has to be shown and reflected in this shifting world order.
Fouad, it's been great speaking to you. Really interesting subject, and we wish you continued success with your work. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. Okay, after the break, we'll take a closer look at the deepening humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, where millions remain in urgent need of assistance. Don't go away. Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. Millions of people in Afghanistan remain in urgent need of humanitarian support, according to the United Nations. A new report also warns that large-scale returns from Pakistan and Iran are putting further pressure on already struggling communities. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis has the details from Kabul.
The humanitarian situation in Afghanistan remains deeply worrying. The United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says 21.9 million people needed humanitarian assistance in the first 3 months of 2026. But despite plans to reach 17.5 million people, aid agencies were only able to assist 4.7 million. That is just around 27% of the people targeted. The biggest challenge appears to be funding. OCHA says $1.7 billion were required for the humanitarian response, but only $195 million has so far been secured. This huge funding gap means millions of vulnerable families are still without full support. The report says children made up almost half of those who received assistance at 49%. At the same time, the UN response plan shows Afghanistan is also dealing with a growing returnee crisis. It says around 5.8 million Afghans have returned since September 2023, and a further 2.69 million are projected to return from Pakistan and Iran between April and December this year. Aid agencies say more funding is urgently needed for emergency border help and longer-term support, warning that without it, Afghanistan's fragile communities will face even greater pressure. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Well, joining me now is Elham Neda to discuss the scale of Afghanistan's humanitarian crisis, the UN's warning over the funding shortfall and the growing pressure from the return of millions of Afghans from Pakistan and Iran. Elham, very good indeed to have you with us on the show. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. We're talking about a situation, aren't we, where millions of people still need basic support. So how do you explain the fact that despite the scale of the needs, so much of the funding just simply isn't coming through?
First of all, thanks for having me again in your show. I would say that there are two biggest factors in receiving or maybe like providing the supporting aid for the families, remove the humanitarian crisis or to remove the situation. So first of all, we can see that, okay, the Taliban don't have a structural government. They don't have a structural way of ruling. The funds, the aids are willing to support the people inside Afghanistan. Sometimes they're gone without any kind of like answers. And from the other end, the second factor is the government providing those acts. We know that, okay, there is like a lack of banking system. The NGOs are not working inside Afghanistan. Like most of the NGOs are not working, let's say. But still, there have to be another ways to provide aid to families who are willing to have those support. And we can see like it's not only in the provinces. Now it's been visible in the capital city as well. And most of the people coming from the Iran and Pakistan, as your journalists also say, they're coming directly to the capital. And by the time, I think like it would be a massive crisis.
And when you look at that gap between what's required and what's actually being delivered, is this now a case of humanitarian fatigue possibly setting in? I mean, it sounds awful, but, you know, or is something more structural, do you think, happening in terms of how Afghanistan is being prioritized?
Well, labeling it as a fatigue makes it really easy for those who are involved in such a situation. But it's much deeper and it's much worse than this case, I would say. Of course, there are families who are selling their kids to feed their other kids. There are families who don't have any kind of livelihood, any kind of food and basic things which has been needed to live. It's somehow structural, but most of the time, I would say it's the importance that the international community is denying. If there is aid needed to support those families, then there has to be a way as well.
Yeah, just unspeakable situations that people are clearly suffering. We're also seeing large numbers of people returning to the country from neighbouring states. How much pressure is that placing on communities that, as you've described, are already frankly operating at breaking point?
So I would say that the funds right now, which has been provided, is not enough. And just last year, 40% of the United Nations humanitarian response plan was cut off. So now by the Trump administration, most of the humanitarian aid coming to Afghanistan has also been cut. And it would pressurize, according to the reports, there are around 9 to 10 million people coming back to Afghanistan. And by their existence in Afghanistan, of course, this would be a massive thing. As I said before, again, I'm saying like instead of like having a petty action against it, let's be accountable and let's have a way to find out what's the best for this crisis.
Yeah, I mean, the need for aid is apparent, unquestionable. Do you think there's also a question about the mechanism, what happens here to support people? You know, instead of aid, could there be a sort of longer term solution that could be looked at to really create longer term sustainable recovery and really put the country back on a more positive footing?
In last 20 years before Taliban came back to power, most of the time the economy was stable just based on the international community aids, and literally there was no infrastructure which can generate like economical stability inside Afghanistan, and that's the same thing right now as well. And with the Taliban presence, with their like top priority being making militias and terrorizing more people, so most of the money and most of the aids is going towards that direction instead of like focusing on the humanitarian aid.
And just stepping back for a moment, what do you think this crisis tells us about the international community at this stage, about their willingness or perhaps their inability to actually sort of come in and help?
I would say, sorry, I just got a bit emotional. I would say right now we are in a middle of crisis, and from the other end, Brussels is asking Taliban to come over to Brussels and to have a talk about, for example, deporting people from here. For the last 20-25 years, Afghanistan people have sacrificed themselves just to have the promises which they, like international community, gave to Afghan people, and right now they're washing their hands out of that promises, and they're just leaving us with a barbarian terrorist group called Taliban.
Elham, given the gravity of what's going on and the reality of how this is affecting people's lives, there is no need to apologise for getting emotional. We quite understand that reaction, and we thank you very much indeed for taking the time to join us tonight on Primetime.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me in your show.
Okay, after the break, we'll check in with our correspondents around the globe. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Primetime. The UK is experiencing an unusually early heat wave with temperatures expected to reach record levels for May. Well, health officials have issued warnings across much of England as forecasters say the extreme heat could continue in the days ahead.
The UK is bracing for what could become the hottest May day ever recorded, with temperatures expected to reach as high as 34 degrees today. England, Wales and Northern Ireland recorded their highest temperatures of the year on Sunday, which was also the UK's hottest May day for at least 80 years. The Met Office says a part of England could surpass the previous May temperature record as the current heat wave intensifies across the country. A heat wave has already been confirmed in 8 parts of England, including areas of London, Essex, Suffolk and Oxfordshire, after 3 consecutive days of unusually high temperatures. Forecasters say conditions will remain unusually hot and dry for this time of year, with temperatures well above the seasonal average. Weather experts say the early arrival of such intense heat is another sign of how climate patterns in the UK are changing. According to the latest European State of the Climate report, Europe is the fastest warming continent in the world, with heat waves becoming more frequent and more intense. According to the Met Office, the number of days in the UK with temperatures above 30 degrees has more than trebled compared with historical averages. The UK Health Security Agency has an amber heat health alert in place across much of England, warning the extreme heat could increase pressure on hospitals and health services, particularly for older people, young children, pregnant women, and those with underlying health conditions. People are being advised to stay hydrated, avoid direct sunlight during the hottest hours of the day, and check in on vulnerable relatives and neighbors. And with summer still weeks away, meteorologists warn this may only be the beginning of a potentially very hot season ahead. Jennifer Zade, A News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
Turkey says it is ready to support the implementation of a potential agreement involving Iran and the reopening of the Hormuz Strait. Well, the comments came during a series of weekend calls between President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, US President Donald Trump and regional leaders amid renewed speculation over a possible diplomatic breakthrough with Tehran. Our correspondent Adam Morrow reports.
Ankara is signaling that it wants to play a constructive role in any potential diplomatic arrangement involving Iran, particularly one that could help secure maritime stability in the Gulf and ease pressure on global energy markets. According to the Turkish presidency, President Erdogan told Donald Trump and regional leaders over the weekend that guaranteeing free passage through the Strait of Hormuz would contribute to regional stability and provide relief to the global economy. The comments came after Trump announced Saturday that a largely negotiated memorandum of understanding linked to an Iran peace deal would lead to the reopening of the strategically vital waterway. Iranian state media, however, later disputed that characterization, creating uncertainty over how close any agreement may actually be. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the world's most critical energy choke points, with roughly a fifth of globally traded oil passing through the narrow corridor linking the Persian Gulf to international markets. Any disruption of the waterway has immediate implications for oil prices, shipping costs, and broader economic stability. Turkey, which imports significant volumes of energy and sits at the crossroads of regional trade routes, has consistently pushed for de-escalation in the Gulf and diplomatic solutions to regional crises. Ankara's latest remarks suggest it is positioning itself as a possible mediator or facilitating actor if negotiations between Iran and the United States move forward. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Uzbekistan has approved a new special tax regime, allowing foreign citizens to receive exemptions from taxes on income earned abroad as part of efforts to attract international investors and highly qualified specialists.
Under the new regulation approved by the Cabinet of Ministers, foreigners living in Uzbekistan will be able to apply for exemptions from taxes on income received from sources outside the country. Applications will be reviewed by the Tax Committee and a special commission. To qualify, applicants must own or rent property in Uzbekistan and stay in the country for at least 30 days within a 12-month period. Applications can be submitted through public service centers or online government portals. Foreign citizens granted the status will pay a special fee of $50,000, while an additional $10,000 will apply for each participating minor family member. The maximum duration of the special tax regime is 5 years. Authorities say the measure is aimed at improving Uzbekistan's investment attractiveness and simplifying residency conditions for foreign nationals. Participants in the program will also receive fast access to residence permits. It is Civil Rajab reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
Okay, we're going to take a short break now and we'll be back in just a few moments' time. Welcome back to Primetime. Officials and diplomats have gathered in Baku to mark Africa Day conference and discuss expanding ties between Azerbaijan and African countries. Well, the talks are focusing on trade, investment and long-term strategic cooperation. Our correspondent Gulcin Hojalieva has more.
Azerbaijan's trade with African countries increased significantly, rising from $150 million in 2023 to $580 million in 2025, a trend reflecting growing economic potential between the two sides. The development was highlighted at the Africa Day conference in Baku under the theme Rising Continent, Emerging Partnerships. The event brought together diplomats, officials and experts to discuss strengthening Azerbaijan-Africa relations. Two panel discussions were held. The first one focused on Azerbaijan-Africa relations, exploring current cooperation and future strategic opportunities with participation from ambassadors, Azerbaijani diplomats and members of parliament.
Azerbaijan-Africa relations is constantly growing. Now we have diplomatic relations with almost all African countries except one and Central African Republic, and we are working on concluding a memorandum of understanding, establishing diplomatic relations with this country as well. This September we are going to finalize it. Of course, there is still untapped potential that we can explore further in the cooperation between Azerbaijan and Africa.
We want to affirm that indeed we find Azerbaijan to be a very significant partner. The potential we see are in areas of cooperation relating to energy. As you know, sub-Saharan Africa is experiencing shortages and challenges with energy distribution, energy production.
Dear students, and now please.
Participants were also introduced to Asan Services' international cooperation initiatives in Africa, highlighting its expanding engagement on the continent. The second panel examined Africa's role in the evolving global system, focused on Agenda 2063 and long-term development priorities. The conference underscored growing political dialogue and expanding cooperation between Azerbaijan and African nations. Gülçin Hocalayeva, Natik Mehmedov, A News.
Azerbaijan is preparing to host a major international energy gathering this June, bringing together key industry players, government officials and global experts. Well, the event will feature a wide programme of discussions, exhibitions and high-level meetings focused on energy cooperation and innovation.
Baku Energy Week will be hosted by Azerbaijan from the 1st to the 3rd of June. This year's event is expected to bring together international and local companies from 45 countries.
Under this year's programme, the main topics of discussion will include energy security, green energy, oil and gas projects, renewable energy sources, regional cooperation and investment opportunities. Baku Energy Forum will open for the first time at the Baku Expo Center on June 1st. The forum's subsequent sessions will be held at the Baku Congress Center.
The event will feature panel discussions, presentations, development sessions and document signing ceremonies. At the same time, the Trans-Logistica exhibition will be held, focusing on current issues in the region's transport and logistics sector.
Within the framework of this year's Baku Energy Week programme, a number of high-level events aimed at strengthening regional and international cooperation in the energy sector are planned. One of these events will be a meeting attended by ministers from D8 countries.
The state oil company of Azerbaijan is the main partner of this year's Baku Energy Week. The company's leadership will speak at the Forum on Energy Transition, Future Strategies and Regional Cooperation. The design of the SOCAR exhibition stand has also been developed around this concept. It will present information about the company's history, current activities and future plans. It will also highlight SOCAR's role in the energy sector, its international partnerships and its contribution to energy security. Baku Energy Forum is expected to bring together more than 700 participants and over 60 international speakers. The forum will discuss energy security, green energy, regional cooperation, digitalization, artificial intelligence and sustainable energy systems. The exhibition will showcase innovations in oil and gas field development, drilling technologies, pipelines, digital solutions, artificial intelligence and decarbonisation.
Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić began a 5-day visit to China. While highlighting growing ties between Belgrade and Beijing, Vučić also told reporters he could resign soon as large anti-government demonstrations continue across Serbia.
Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić arrived in Beijing on Sunday for a state visit to China from May 24th to 28th, marking his first state visit to the country. According to Chinese media, Serbia is also the first European country to agree with China on building a community with a shared future for the new era. At the start of his visit, Vučić said he could resign soon. According to M1 TV, he stressed that he would not prematurely reduce his powers, as former Serbian President Boris Tadić had done. He said a president either resigns or remains in office until the end of the mandate. Vučić's remarks came as large anti-government protests continued in Belgrade, where thousands gathered in the city centre demanding political change in the latest wave of demonstrations against his rule. Despite tensions at home, Vučić received a warm welcome in China at the start of his 5-day visit, aimed at strengthening bilateral ties between Beijing and Belgrade. Upon arriving in Beijing, he visited the Great Wall, where he watched performances of traditional Serbian folk dances and songs.
This speaks a lot about Chinese people. This speaks a lot about your persistence, your desire to defend your country, your borders, your sovereignty, independence. But also it presents always the diligence and dedication of Chinese people, which I admire very much and very happy to be here for the first time.
Vučić is scheduled to hold talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping and Premier Li Qiang to review bilateral relations and discuss international issues.
And coming up after Primetime tonight, A News speaks with Rebecca Grinspan, Secretary-General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. In an exclusive interview with A News' Executive Director, Rufat Hamzayev, the Secretary-General discusses global inequality, development challenges, and the future of international cooperation.
If you become, or when you become Secretary General, what should the United Nations do differently from day one?
One of the first things that I will do is to bring the UN back at the table where the negotiations. I really believe that there is a kind of back to regionalism. You are bringing Central Asia, connecting Central Asia with Europe and China.
We are meeting just after the MOVE 13, and one of the main questions still remain: who should finance the cities of the future?
Housing and building homes is one of the most important things to maintain social cohesion, stability, hope in the future. I don't think that the world is going only in one direction. I really believe we are living in an era of contradiction.
Yeah, do stay with us for that exclusive interview. Well, that brings us to the end of Primetime for this evening. Please do join us tomorrow, though, for plenty more news and analysis. And from all of us here at A News, thanks for watching.